It really is overwhelming when you look at the map of the world, just how much of that is pure water. It's a big beat.
Measured in miles for sure. Yeah. And surprisingly, a lot more people exist out there than I think we tend to realize.
Yeah, I was noticing the pins on your world map. You've got a lot of pins on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, a lot of travel in the last 2 decades. Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. It's really generous of you, and you take such care and rigor, and that feels very respectful.
Yeah, well, it's really, really nice to connect with you. So maybe we could start just if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Ian Urbina. I'm a journalist, and I'm the director of the Outlaw Ocean Project, which is a nonprofit investigative journalism organization that focuses on crimes and other concerns on the watery two-thirds of the planet.
So what was the first ship you actually set foot on?
Wow.
And what year was that?
What year? So it would have been 2014. It would have been when I launched on the original reporting for the New York Times series, The Outlaw Ocean. The first story for that series was a look at sea slavery and captive labor generally, but specifically in the South China Sea, in the Thai fleet, mostly Cambodian, Laotian, Burmese, Rohingya. And so a videographer, photographer named Adam Dean and I kind of decamped in Songkhla, Thailand, very gritty port where a lot of the distant water fishing vessels launch from, very mobbed up city, pretty rough place, and just were getting on as many ships as we could in the hope of trying to get one of them to take us out far enough so that we could get on the specific type of ship that we suspected would be more likely to have this kind of captive crew. And we were getting a lot of just really gross fishing vessels.
I can only imagine. This is the only podcast that gives off a stink, like a smell.
That's right. And part of it's coming from me in these stories. Yes.
You describe the smells a little bit, but really you could spend a half an hour, I'm sure, really really diving into some disgusting metaphors. I just ugh. 2014, that's 11 years ago. Did you have a sense that this kind of would become your life's work at that point? Like you done any reporting about the ocean, about seafaring up until that time?
None. No. Yeah. I mean, I was fascinated, but no, I had not. I didn't grow up on sailboats yeah, I had no relationship in any real way with the sea.
So that's a big surprise. I mean, I think a lot of people come to the ocean because they were born into it or born on it and to choose it.
Yeah. No, I never knew whether I would be well suited for time on vessels.
So I've listened to all of your work. I've covered season one and season two in my small little independent newsletter, Bingeworthy. Thank you for taking the time to speak to the independents as well as all the rest of the hundreds of media outlets you speak with. And as I've shared, I had mixed feelings about season one because I was so excited to listen to it and felt like, wow, you have this incredible, like you want to talk about a true crime yarn to unravel. You have a lot of mileage to work with. But you wrapped it up so quickly, like the murder video,
Mm.
that could have been 6 episodes. You could
Mm.
have you could have gone down a rabbit hole and just kept going and kept going and kept going. But maybe in your words, I'd like to hear what you tell me how you feel about the difference between season one and season two.
Season one, I had never made a podcast. I teamed up with a guy who also had never made a podcast. He's a doc film guy. And I said, let's just do it the way we think it should be done. And we might end up producing something that isn't great and podcasters slam us for it. Or maybe we'll do something that's different and good. But I really want to stick with the compilation approach. So season one was one episode, one story. Season two, I worked with a different crew, amazing folks from CBC, and I pushed hard on this whole I want to stick with the one episode, one story model. But the things that we had produced were too big. They weren't one chapter in a book. They were one project that took 4 years to report and rolled out over the course of a whole year in the New Yorker, the concept of China, the concept of abuse of migrants in Libya and what happened to us. And eventually I realized they were right, that it's a bad idea to try to push that all into one episode, and it would be too long and too heavy. So I acquiesced. So this season, 3 episodes on China, 3 episodes on Libya, 1 episode on Repo Men of the Sea, 1 episode on this investigation we did into labor abuse in India, having to do with shrimp. So it's a weird thing, it's not one or the other, but I also sort of felt like, look, we're making a podcast season about things that we reported previously, so we're sort of cheating in that we're not actually putting forward truly virgin content. We're putting forward content that was reported, we wrote about, it ran, and now we're taking a different whack at it in a different medium for a different audience, hopefully. I don't have the time and ability to go re-report these stories and bring in a whole lot of new that would justify an entire series on China or something like that. I need to be moving on to the next investigation. So I'd be curious, honestly, your take as a
Mm.
as a true expert at podcasts of what was different and better or worse in season two.
Well, a lot was different. One thing I noticed is that you allow yourself to be in the story in season two,
Mm,
because everyone's very curious about, you're the one who's been there. And actually, no one cares that it was 5 or 7 years ago.
mm,
It's still current now. And even if you read the piece in the New Yorker or the New York Times or any of the other many
mm,
places it goes out, because you were there, because you had the immediacy of having that experience. You're not reporting on it from, reading reports and talking to people. You were actually there. And this is, I always feel like, one of the strengths of podcasts in particular, and how your superpower is here, is that you were the person who was on these stinky ships in the middle of nowhere, meeting these people in very precarious situations, digesting all kinds of very complicated axes of power and imbalance, and how you break down how the EU sits on this migrant journey was an
mhm,
eye opener for sure. You can write that as a paragraph. The EU is complicit in the migrant fare between here and there because they donate goods and water bottles and whatever. You,
mhm,
but to have that explained piece by piece, do you want a bottle of water? Did you know that came from the EU? You can put on
mhm,
your life jacket. That actually came from the EU. You're on a ship that is leased through the EU. So it allows, the pacing of that allows you to really understand it on a whole other level, which is amazing for an audience. That was a huge eye opener for me. And one of the questions I had for you about this, because you were there and you did the reporting, there is tape that comes in and out, and sometimes it's sort of scene tape that's embedded below just to give you the ambiance of
mhm,
being there. But do you, and because I know you travel with a photographer and a videographer, I was wondering why there wasn't more of that. Why
mm.
the balance between narration and scene tape was, I don't know percentages, but I would say it's like 60-70% narration, 30-40% scene tape. So how did you come to that decision? And that's a curiosity I have of the production style.
It was not a decision. We were kidnapped by a militia and they took all our stuff.
Well, that part, yes,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
thinking as
Well,
well.
but
I've listened to it all. The last three
the
episodes,
China stuff.
the
Yeah.
China
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay. So on Libya, it's especially sparse and painfully so, because man, it would it would be such a better end product if we had more of what we actually landed in that reporting effort. The stuff that you do here is because it got uploaded to the cloud before we got taken in Libya.
Right.
Therefore, my team back in the US had their own copies of it, but
Hmm.
everything else got erased by our captors. But your question could apply, and I think it does, to the other parts where the balance was more narration. And if I'm very honest, I'll say I kind of deferred to the judgment of Michael Catano and Damon Fairless, who were the intellectual leads on the structuring of the whole thing, and followed their orders. When I did ask about the proportionality, the answer I tended to get was there's so much explanatory to get through. And in fairness, I put a lot of pressure on them of, hey, I want to cover these 25 topics. I need that stuff to get said. And like, that's a lot, Ian. Like in this amount of time, we could get to 12 of them and not lose the reader. And you're going to have to be very concise, which you're not good at. And so we would strike a compromise that way. But it started with me being really greedy about how much ground I wanted to cover from an explanatory point of view.
Yeah, it's true. It's complex, and a lot of people probably feel like they understand it, but when you get into the details, you don't understand it. You don't have the background.
Don't forget foreign language, right?
True.
So
Yeah.
Libya, China, everything is in some other language, and that doesn't play well in podcasts for very long.
You constantly with a fixer or translator.
Yeah, normally I choose videographers who also have the relevant language so that they can play both roles, because on ships or in conflict zones like Libya, you need to keep your team small, and it's usually no more than 3. So that means it's me, a videographer, and then maybe the third person's a translator, or maybe the third person's a second videographer who also has language and they
Hmm.
are willing to play translator role when needed. And that was
Yeah.
the case in China. Ed O, amazing videographer who also speaks Chinese, and then in Libya, Pierre Qatar, French and Arabic, plus a videographer. So I get a lot of bang for the buck out of these guys, and they're very tolerant of me like telling them to do two jobs, at the same time.
I'm always curious to learn more about the writing process and the narration process. So how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, so season 1, Ryan French, he took a lot more time, and he almost exclusively asked me targeted questions, but did not write any script for me. And season 2, Michael Catano and Damon and Nathan, they would take the written content, and oftentimes that's 6 or 7 big meaty stories, 5 to 10,000 word stories. They would then figure out what feels possible in the time frame, what laundry list I've given them of topics I really want to get out there. They would pull language from the written pieces. They would sand it down a little bit, probably, so that it speaks better. Then we would do these sit down sessions, about 2-3 hours, where it would be a combination of script and open-ended questions. And if we got to a scripted thing, I would recognize the words, and sometimes I'd be like, I don't like what you've done in the sanding here. And they'd say, okay, fine, Ian, just riff. And I would try to riff as efficiently as they had been. And if I didn't succeed, then they'd say, great, okay, now read our script, because you're taking too long to get the point across. And I would do what they told me. And so the end result is a mix of open-ended questions where I would just answer, me reading their script and trying to sound like I wasn't reading, and me just riffing to some topic where I'd read their script, but I was like, I can do that faster and better if I just do it in my own words right now, live.
Yeah, I could hear all of that actually, because sometimes I could see the markups of it, of the like pause and yeah. But in season one, my hunch, and this is like a curious nerdy question, my hunch is that you did that as an interview. He would ask you questions or a question, and it was done strategically in a way to get the information, and then his question was eliminated, and your answer became the
Exactly.
narration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. And it took me a while to sort of hone in on that. It's almost from an older time, but the effect of listening to that as the listener with this very intimate headphones was that you weren't talking to me. You were talking to the other person in the room. Whereas a
Mm, mm,
narration is really, it's a scripted thing to have this one-to-one connection. That was the biggest difference for me between season one and season two, is that you were talking to the listener now, because it was a script, and they're podcast experts and narration writers.
mm. Which
And
is better, right? I mean, if the goal is, I'm supposed to be talking to you, not
mhm.
Ryan.
Yeah. What was interesting, because I hadn't listened to season one in a while, so I popped back and listened to different ones. And it was interesting to hear that your tone of voice was more fluid and more conversational. And it felt more like it was just you talking.
Mm.
And whereas season two, some of it I wasn't sure you were 100% comfortable with it. And it was like, I'm gonna put this sentence together, but I'm not sure I totally Love it.
Wow. Yes. Okay. Nakedly revealed. Yes. I think you're spot on. Not because it was wrong or whatever, not well written, just because it didn't feel like mine. It felt adjacent to mine. It was like an an alteration to what I originally said, the way I nerdily wanted to say it.
And the thing that podcasting does is it really quickly, because my theory is that it's such an intimate environment that it just makes you have to be real honest real fast, and any pretense is so visible. The listeners are now, the difference between 2022 and 2025, 3 years have passed, the listeners have changed, the form is adapting, which is interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's very much in the moment of its time, and I spend a lot of time thinking about writing narration and host delivery and elocution. And so maybe if you come back for season 3, you've learned how to do this, and you'll learn to write your own script. Well, he's like,
Let's
I'm
not
doing
get carried
other
away.
things.
Exactly. I'm not sure I should be trusted with script writing, but yes, we'll see if there's a different version that comes out in season 3. We're already talking about getting it going.
I did have this question. You had this prestigious job. You had the job everyone wants, to be the reporter at the New York Times who's able to go anywhere and do anything and have it funded and paid for. And after a certain amount of time, you said, I'm going to leave this and go and start a risky business proposition and make an independent media outlet, tell stories in a multi-platform universe. And I'm going to go and do it. Why?
Have you talked to my wife recently or something?
I've got to
I feel
call
like
into
you're
her. We're
channeling her.
speaking
Yeah.
later.
If she submit that question online.
Uh,
Well, the honest answer is several variables. One is I was at a stage in my development and in my relationship with the New York Times. I'd been there 17 years, loved the place, learned everything I know now from them. But the pressure was for me to move into an editing job and or move into Washington investigative, and I didn't want to do either. I just didn't. I wanted to stay close to reporting, and I wanted to stay out in the field internationally, and then thirdly, I didn't want to just stay out in the field internationally. I also felt like there were such amazing, unusually virgin stories that I didn't get to in the original series I ran in the paper or the 2-year book leave that I was given generously to sort of scratch the itch. And I got back and the itch was worse. Like, I kind of want to find stories that grab me personally and then also remove the time element. So decidedly slow journalism, that's the other luxury I have now, is like, I think if I assemble a team around me and if I remove the time element, we can do spectacular things that most normal reporters can't, because there's investors that are expecting you to produce on the amount of money that went into that one story. So they need it in the paper. In retrospect, I realized how risky it was, more so than I realized at the time. And it's still really risky. Frankly, I spent a third of my time fundraising, and we have a staff of 10, and we have the budget to keep doing this for another year and a half. At any given moment, we have maybe 15 months of life in the bank. I got a lot of people, young people, whose lives and livelihoods are relying on me continuing to fundraise and keep this going. And I wouldn't have had that pressure if I was at an institution, sort of tenured faculty at the Times, but I'd also have to be taking those calls nonstop, writing stories I wasn't that into.
If you could kind of quickly distill the business model of how you fund this, how do you do that on a pie chart?
About 2/3 are foundations. It's the subset that has kind of been quietly delineated as those players who really get journalists and know where the church state line is, which is to say Packard, Bloomberg, 11th Hour Racing, which is Eric Schmidt from Google. These are all players that also fund the New York Times Magazine, the AP, the Washington Post Magazine. Like, they get that, okay, if you're going to fund journalists, you can't know what the story is. We go to funders and say, if you like what we do, then here's what I'm planning on us doing for the next 2 years, 3 years. If you like those general subject matters and areas and think we'll do a good job at it, then give us operating expense. And there's about a dozen big foundations that understand that assessment and the rules. So that's so 2/3 is foundation and 1/3 is just average readers who through Substack, which is free by default, but if you want to toss in, that's the way that most people say, hey, $10 a month or $100 a month or $2 a month. And we have about a third of our revenue comes in that way.
But you haven't mentioned licensing fees and broadcast fees, print fees, that stuff.
Not yeah. So print fees. So the one of the things that we market at donors is if you're going to spend $1.3 million on an investigative project, which is how much China cost, and it's going to take you 4 years, and you're going to go to sea for 12 months in different places and et cetera, et cetera. You can't take that story to any venue and expect that they can pay a per word rate that will ever come close to covering your costs. So what I tell funders is, therefore, we're not charging venues for two reasons. One, they're going to say, okay, we paid you $1 a word for a 10,000 word story. Therefore, we want to own it. Okay. And that's a non starter for us because that means if you own it, the New Yorker or the New York Times or whatever, then I can't also run it in 20 other venues in 10 languages around the world, including global South venues that can't pay a cent for it. So you basically are locking this IP, this intellectual property down in a way that prevents me from having the broadest impact and the broadest reach. So we don't charge.
So you're saying you give your stories for free to CBC, the
Well, okay, so
New York
getting there.
Times.
So, yeah, so yeah, New York Times, yes, but CBC with the podcast season, what we do with them is, so season one, so I essentially said, hey, I'm going to take the funding. I'm going to pay Ryan. We're going to work on it for a year and a half or whatever. It'll cost X amount. And then we're going to finish the whole thing. And then we're going to take it to whomever wants it. And if they're willing to put in money to have some level of exclusivity, then for the podcast season, then great, we can cover some of our costs. So that's what we did with season one. LA Times and CBC cut a deal. They each put in a certain amount of money. It didn't cover what it cost, but it came pretty close. So we ended up being near break even, which was great. And our funders were happy about it. And it was a big enough, it was two venues, one in Canada, one in the US. The print stuff we run, the magazine, the core journalism, and the videos we create, that's all free. And what we do with rich venues, the New York Times, Le Monde Diplomatique, El País in Spain, is we say, hey, look, we have a long-term relationship. You know how we operate. It's free. But if you want to toss something in the hat for it, you set the number and toss it in. We will give you an exclusive in Le Monde is in, you get France. We're not going to pitch we're not going to pitch Liberation, anyone else. CBC can't, and Globe and Mail. Okay. We're not going to pitch anyone else, like, and if you want to put in, then you can. If you can't, great. We just want the relationship and the access to your audience. And so that's the relationship. So CBC puts in for the podcast, but Globe and Mail, for example, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, we have a great relationship with them. They run virtually everything. There's no money exchanged ever. We just have the relationship.
Wow. I mean, I'm in shock that they have this incredible, like, cutting edge reporting from the moment, from the place, and they get a fully realized piece of reporting, piece of writing backed up with all the stuff, and they just have to run it in their newspaper.
But okay, in fairness, if I'm David Walmsley, editor at the Globe and Mail, like I would say, okay, Ian fundraises off of the braggadocio that is, hey, Packard, we ran this series in 68 venues in 50 countries, and the venues were tier one, and their readership are on the order of this. So please keep funding us because of our reach. If we only ran it in Globe and Mail or The
Mhm.
Guardian and they paid something for it and therefore got the right to lock it
Mhm.
down, then our reach would be so much less. And I don't think funders would be as inclined to fund us rather than the magazine at the
Mm,
Guardian. They're like, well, this guy's going to get stuff in the Guardian plus all these other venues, including the Global South,
right.
because of his model. Let's fund him rather than a one-off in one venue that the 1% already convinced read.
So you're not only taking a step to get people to understand the greater impact and concept of the ocean, but you've taken on journalism, the funding model of journalism and the access and the credibility to say and do what you want and get it out to people and the ownership. It's bigger than I thought. It's
It is,
bigger
it
than I
is,
knew.
I think it's pretty genius and it's working well for us. Is it replicatable and is it sustainable? That's where the bad news comes in. I don't think it's sustainable because these funding entities aren't going to forever. I don't think, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think they're going to, for a next decade, continue funding me to do this because they just get distracted and interested in spreading the wealth around, etc. And then can other venues do it? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. It works well for us, and I think it'll probably keep going strong for another 5 years at least. And that's the other thing is when you win awards and you get respect of the likes of you for like, hey, this is quality journalism. More and more editors say these guys are doing something weird and different, but we should hear them out because people that understand good journalism are letting them publish with them. And so it's growing our grid, and that hopefully will grow our funding.
I was digging around on the website and realized that you had this whole transparency report. It was the shrimp plant. And, this is who we spoke to. This is how we corroborated this. We know this guy had a shady past. This is how we credentialed him. And then here's some audio clips that you can hear him actually having these conversations. Like, I mean, you have a whole website, so you have a universe in which to place all these things, but it goes to a whole other level that you don't see very often. Did you choose to do that, or is that a requirement of funding?
No, no. I mean, I bet you my funders would love if I didn't do that because it would take a good 6 months off of the time frame of this stuff. It is, again, me trying to make a point vis-a-vis our shared profession, which is like, what if you removed money and time from what we do and brought in creative, innovative, and rigor? What would that look like? And on the methodological approach, the rigor is, what if we had absolute transparency? So every exchange we had with every country, every company, we put the full what we wrote them and what they wrote back. So it's not just cherry picked quotes. You can actually click in and see the full thing. And then we have a methodological kind of user's manual for everything we do, where all my staff has almost like a diary of, so how did we do that? Did it work? Did it fail? What compromises came with that use of AI or this, that, or whatever? And it's this crazy back end thing that maybe a small set of people, hardcore journalists like yourself, are interested in consuming. I like doing it because it keeps us feeling honest, and some funders and awards people take the time to look at it, and it is unique. And again, a normal venue who's dealing with the pressures of time can't take that much time to do that, but we're trying to do something a little bit different here. And if that means we only produce one big story every 6 months, but
Mhm.
it has all these other bells and whistles, then I'm okay with that.
So inside this radical proposition you have for journalism and transparent, almost open source media, how does the podcast platform and the podcast format fit into that? How does it help it? How does it change it? How does it speak to it? What is it?
So in the universe of things I wanted to do differently, one was I want to focus on a place that gets overlooked, the Watery Two Thirds. I don't want to treat it as an environmental story. I want to stay at the intersection of human environment, and that'll be different than the standard default coverage. It always gets parked in the ocean desk, on the environmental climate desk. And I was like, we're not doing that. We're going to lead with human stories. It's going to be environmental, but that's the backdrop. Then I want to blow up the copyright intellectual property rules that I think are a disservice to creators and the public, and the potential for impact on investigative journalism. So we're going to blow that up by some alternate model where we force editors to only have limited exclusivity, and then radical methodological sort of back ending of how we do everything to the extent we can. Okay, now the universe that's also in here is distribution. Like there's a lot of really cool things happening in how stories are packaged and told and presented and even reported, AI and OSI, open source intelligence and stuff. But how you get it out feels a little bit um I don't know, uncreative, undaring. So and so what we want to do is say, okay, we spent a year in Libya. We can write a 10,000 word story for the New Yorker. We can slice and dice it so it becomes a newspaper series, and then we can run that in lots of newspapers, translate it in 10 languages, and build the relationships with editors in all these obscure venues in global South nations. Great. Okay. But why stop there? What if we converted that core reporting in its present form into other forms? In the less radical move, it's short videos, podcasts, let's take the same reporting and just ignore the people who are like, oh, you're recycling. And friends of mine, editors of mine are like, oh, Ian, I've heard this story 5 times now, like getting, okay, yes, I know, but different people read the New Yorker than will hear the podcast or see that video on TikTok or whatever. That's one phase. The other phase is really weird and radical, I guess, is art, right? So music, mural, video game. So how do you take this story and without kind of slipping into misery porn or something, or run the risk of, I don't know, of degrading a serious topic into some entertainment form?
Mm-hmm.
How do you possibly access other people in maybe a different emotional way with this reporting and use it as an on-ramp back to the core original form? And that's the other front of distribution creativity. But podcast is like super central. I underestimated the power of podcasts. And the first season, I was like, I don't know. I don't really listen to many podcasts. I don't know anything about them. I'm not sure many people will consume it. And then, wow, was I wrong? Like so many people listen to podcasts and so many people reached out in a way that the written story didn't get them.
For me, there's a real importance with audio reporting like this and turning it into a podcast to be transparent about who's doing it and why you're doing it and why you're there. And then this real kind of relationship building, nation building between you and the listener. And so in some ways you have to validate your time and experience being there, which is done from the tape,
Mm-hmm.
from the actual moment of being there. And then the other is the credibility of you being the person reporting the story and then telling on the ground reporting and telling later. And it creates this very unique soup where there's all these ingredients that are really super unique. And in a world of podcasts where a lot of them sound the same and a lot of them are interview and chat, to have something that has this feeling of taking you there in audio, it's very powerful.
I underestimated what audio feels like when you're consuming a story. I thought, well, it's video minus the images. It's way more than that, because minus
Yeah.
the images means you're building them in your own head. And that means it's way more intimate and emotional than reading a written word or even watching it. It's so literal when it's a video. It's not literal when it's audio, because you're pulled in, but you're crafting the setting in your own head at the same time. And that means you're way more invested. I get that now. I didn't get that before the first season.
So where does it go from here? Where do you want to take it?
More of the same. I mean, I think we've got the sausage factory humming along in a way that I like, and we take on big topics. And I have the best crew I've ever had in this 5-year journey so far. The chemistry, the kindness, the rigor, the mix of skills. So we're hammering on investigation, envisioning stage one as this written big package and running it out in a bunch of different countries around the world. There'll be video and stills and written word in stage one. Stage two is podcasts, and hopefully that same CBC squad will begin working on it. And then stage three is sort of art transformation, music, mural, animation, video game. These sorts of things are projects that are constantly running in the third ring around all the stuff we create. So we have folks working on things that are taking the reporting and doing their own versions of it, if you will.
And is it following up on one of the stories you've already reported, or is it something totally new?
I've painted myself in a corner. I didn't mean to just be doing like atrocities of distant water fishing vessels, and I'm doing a lot of it, and I kind of want to get out of that corner. But this project is hugely looking at a quarter of all marine life pulled out of the water goes to livestock feed, and feed, as different from food, is a really interesting dark
Mm.
product that no one pays attention to because it's going into an animal. It's pet food, but it's also chickens, pigs, aquaculture. And so that whole universe is, we're taking a global look at every factory in the world and every country and all the ships, and like the biggest kind of target we've taken on. And we're 2 years in, we probably still have a year to go, but when it's done, it'll be, I think, really, really impressive. Probably the strongest journalism I've ever been associated with is that project. There's this great quote that Michael Pollan, the food writer, mentioned once: we aren't just what we eat, or what we eat eats. The reason I'm attracted to what we eat eats is, if we're really looking at the planet and all that we as consumers touch, iPhones and Nike shoes and the shirt and palm oil and seafood, they're all just products that have these insane globalized supply chains. So that what we're doing in this one supply chain is transferable. All the revelations about how murky and how hidden costs are buried within it, and how we're all complicit and trying to beat the tracking challenges to get light on those supply chains. So what attracts me about feed is it's a part of the supply chain that's super dark. It's like not even thought about. It's the ingredients that go into the ingredients that end up in our mouth. So that's really nerdy, but it
Mhm.
to me is like, that's a perfect target for us to radically tackle and throw a lot of light on. And that's what we're doing. And there's a lot of insane stuff down there at that dark end of the supply chain.
I do have a burning question that comes to me sometimes when I'm listening to this and imagining where you are. Do you eat seafood?
You're not the first. I do. Okay, so I am officially a vegetarian. I have been since I was a sophomore in college. But truthfully, I'm a bad vegetarian because uh, I like
Bacon?
bacon. Yeah, and I love shrimp. So I fall off the wagon to the tune of once every 3 months, where I'll have something because it just looks yummy to me. When I'm in the field, I also just have a rule that's like, my eating habits are not going to get in the way of my job, and I don't want to be distracting to the goal, and I'll eat whatever's in front of me. And I'm not at all grossed out by meat or seafood. I think it's all delicious.
And the other, this could be the last question, but my question to you is, what's in your go bag?
Uh,
What are the essentials that you bring with you to all these very remote, not supply chain level places that you need for survival, for happiness, and for production?
well, I'll answer the question, but the precursor to it is like, the stupid part of my go bag is like actually use it as my daily bag. So I
Oh, the
have this.
actual bag, the physical
Yeah,
bag.
well, no, and the stuff in it. So I walk around. My son's in town from college. I meet him at a cafe, and we often work there several times a week. The bag I carry my laptop in weighs 1,000 pounds because it's my go bag, and all this other crap is in there that you don't really need if you're going to Starbucks. But I just don't really feel like unpacking it because God knows I'll forget to repack it. But in the go bag is a insane kit of medicine, like every pill and injection you can imagine. That every year I go to this one doctor who is really generous with me, and she's a travel doctor, and she basically says, okay, anything you could possibly encounter, most likely not for you but for someone else, and can we fit it in here? I also have a sat phone. So I have a audio sat phone, Intelsat phone, and a couple of Garmin belt attachment things, Garmin Mini, that I keep there and try to keep charged, and we have always on. For a while, I had a really good thin solar panel sort of tucked in a certain spot that could charge one of the phones if you sat outside long enough. And then I have obscene numbers of tangled cords for every gizmo that I have. I have my main laptop, and then I have a backup laptop, and then I have a lot of cash. This is why it would be bad if I left that backpack at Starbucks. I have a second passport in there, and then the stuff that I buy right before I get on a ship, the luxury items are I always buy as big a bag of peanut M&Ms as I can fit because I need my sugar dose and they work well. I almost always buy as big a thing of Jif peanut butter as I can because I'm also hooked on that. And then there are these little packets. They're like 2 times the length of your pointer finger, and they have probably like every carcinogen known to man, but it's this powdered Nescafe drink. And I have this gizmo I found online that you can plug in essentially anywhere, and it heats water. It's like you just attach it to the side of a paper cup and it'll boil the water. So between that and my Nescafe packets, I can have the coffee the way I want for weeks. So sugar and coffee are the two. If I could bring Coke Zero, that's my other addiction, but I have not found a way to make that work in a backpack. So that's my go bag.
And when you're out there reporting, what is the kind of module? Like, do you take notes? Do you take audio notes? Do you have a little recorder? Do you take a lot of
Mm,
photos? What is the process that you use when you're out there, A, to remember what's going on, but B, to kind of give a short trip back to that
mm,
emotion or that
mm.
smell or that experience to draw on it later?
A little bit of both. I used to have this great watch. Skull Candy made this really good wristwatch that had a very big storage and really a sensitive audio. And I liked it better than my phone because I needed my hands free climbing around and stuff. And so I could just turn on the watch and it would pick up anything within 5 feet of me, and I could leave it on for 6 straight hours. So I always knew I had like, oh, wait, he said that great turn of phrase on the bridge, or, whatever. Like, or I'll think of something and I'll just speak into my watch. Now, the problem with that is then you have 6 hours of audio to go through. And if you let that pile up a couple days, you're in trouble. So I try to like force myself to keep up on a daily basis. So I set aside 2 very early morning hours, usually 4 to 6 a.m. each morning, where I'm just writing notes from the various scribbles in my notebook. I have one of those traditional little moleskin flip notebooks. So I'm scribbling there a lot. I'm having the audio either on my phone or my watch.
It's been fascinating and illuminating, super interesting to talk to you. Are you allowed to say where you're going next?
Next reporting trip, we're trying to take a look at whaling, and I've got staff who've been toiling at their computer for 2 years and are eager to get out in the field. And that there's an embed that we might get on a ship that's going to be kind of shadowing some Icelandic whalers or maybe Japanese whalers. And
Mm,
so I'll probably take 2 staffers out to either the Southern Ocean or the waters near Iceland to take a look at modern whaling.
wow. Great to connect. Wonderful to you.
Great. And can I hang up or is it already uploaded? There's some
Yeah,
more.
yeah, it's all good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
Bye.
so much.